She looked me dead in the eye, ignored the warm blanket I was offering, and trotted back into the freezing dark like I was the fool. That was the third night I saw her. A shaggy brown dog with eyes like burnt honey, and a limp in her back leg. She always showed up just after sunset on the corner of my hardware store, behind the dumpsters. She never barked, never growled, never wagged her tail. Just stood there with that look, like she was checking something. I'd been leaving scraps ever since the first time I saw her. Half a ham sandwich from lunch, some leftover rotisserie chicken from the grocery store deli. I even started keeping a bowl of water under the loading dock. She always ate everything, always drank every drop. But whenever I stepped close with a leash or a blanket or even a soft-spoken offer to come inside, she would back away. Not scared, just unwilling. Her ribs weren't showing, which surprised me. Her coat, though shaggy and tangled in some places, wasn't matted. She had a nicked ear, and the limp was real, but otherwise she didn't look like a dog who'd been on the street long. Or maybe she was just good at surviving. Better than me, some nights. My name's Grant Whitaker, and I run Whitaker Hardware in Wayland Springs, a small town that only ever shows up on maps if you're zoomed in really close. I inherited the place from my dad, who ran it since before I was born. My wife passed 3 years ago, and since then, I've lived in the small apartment above the shop. It's quiet, and some days too quiet. I never thought a stray dog would give me something to look forward to. But there she was, every night. I started calling her Maple. Don't ask me why. Maybe it was the color of her coat, or the way she moved, like leaves carried by the wind, just out of reach. I'd sit on the back steps some nights, coffee in hand, watching her silently. Talking to her too, like a fool. Told her about the trouble with suppliers. Told her about the kid who accidentally knocked over a shelf of PVC pipe. Even told her about Eleanor, my wife, and how quiet the place felt since she was gone. But Maple never came closer than 10 feet, no matter the weather, no matter the food. Then the temperature dropped. The forecast said single digits overnight. The kind of cold that turns your breath into icicles and makes your fingers ache just thinking about going outside. That night, I set up a space heater in the corner of the loading bay, dragged an old dog bed down from the attic, and even cracked open a can of chicken stew from the store's stock. I sat there waiting, wrapped in 2 jackets and a thick scarf. When she showed up, right on cue, I stood slowly and pointed toward the bed, the heater, the bowl. "You don't have to freeze tonight," I said. "It's safe. You'll be warm, please." She stared at me, then at the bed. Then she turned and walked away. I don't know what got into me that night, but I followed her, grabbed my flashlight and trailed her from a distance, careful not to spook her. She didn't go far, just past the grocery store, behind the abandoned movie theater that's been boarded up since 2008. She slipped through a gap in the fence behind the lot. I hesitated, then followed. She was gone. At first I thought I lost her, but then I saw the faintest flicker of movement under a collapsed awning beside the theater's back door. I crouched and raised my light. There, nestled in an old cardboard box lined with what looked like fleece blankets, were 4 tiny puppies. Barely more than squirming balls of fur. Maple was nudging them, licking their heads gently. I didn't even realize I'd dropped to my knees until I felt the cold soak into them. My throat tightened, something sharp catching behind my eyes. That dog hadn't been running from me. She'd been protecting them. She looked up at me. This time she didn't flinch, didn't move. "You didn't trust me before," I said softly. "But you brought me here." The puppies stirred, one of them letting out a high-pitched yawn. I counted again. 4. They looked only a few weeks old. Their eyes were barely open, and it was cold. too cold for them to last much longer. "Okay," I said. "Okay, Mama. We'll do this your way. But we're getting you all inside." It took almost an hour. I walked back and forth between the theater and the shop 5 times, using an old gym bag for the pups lined with fleece. Maple followed me each trip, never losing sight of the bag. When I carried the last pup, she finally walked beside me, not behind. When we reached the loading dock, she jumped up without hesitation and curled around the bag the moment I set it down inside. I didn't try to close the door. I just sat beside her, sipping coffee that had long gone cold, and listened to the sound of tiny, sleepy breaths. The next day, I called Dr. Barnes, our local vet. She came by with a portable crate and checked the pups right there on the shop floor. Healthy, all 4. Maple had done a good job. The limp, she said, looked like an old sprain. Nothing broken. With rest and better food, she'd be fine. I told Dr. Barnes I'd cover the checkup. And I wasn't giving up the pups. "You keeping them?" she asked with a half-smile. "I guess they're keeping me," I replied. Maple stayed by the heater every night from then on. She still didn't want to be petted, but she let me bring her food. She let me sit near. And every morning I'd wake up to the sound of those pups yipping and rolling around in the blankets like tiny tumbleweeds. Word got out, as it always does in towns like Wayland Springs. Folks started dropping by just to see the miracle litter. Someone even brought a big bag of premium kibble. Kids wanted to name them, and I let them try, though the pups didn't answer to anything just yet. By the end of the week, my back room had turned into a nursery. I started thinking maybe there was more going on behind those honey eyes than anyone ever gave her credit for. And I had a feeling she wasn't done surprising me yet. The first time I saw Maple wag her tail, I almost spilled my coffee. It was a Sunday morning, just after sunrise, and the back room of Whitaker Hardware looked more like a puppy daycare than a supply storage space. Maple had started sleeping indoors full-time by then, though always near the door, like she wasn't entirely sure she belonged inside yet, like she might still be chased out. But that morning, I came down the stairs with my usual cup of black coffee and a couple of scrambled eggs on a plate. One for me, one for her. I'd taken to cooking extra just for her, figuring she'd earned it. I set her plate down near the heater, and when she trotted over, something changed. Her ears perked slightly. Her eyes blinked once. Then, slow and small, her tail gave a soft, single wag. Not much, just a flick, but I saw it. "Well, I'll be," I whispered, setting my cup down. "You really are starting to trust me, huh?" She didn't wag again right away. She ate, calm and quiet, while the pups rolled over each other nearby, gnawing at one another's floppy ears. One of them, brown and white with speckles on his nose, kept stumbling into Maple's side, pawing at her face, and yipping with all the confidence of a creature who believed the world existed solely to amuse him. That pup was the first to get a name. A little girl named Hallie came in with her grandpa that Tuesday. He needed nails, she needed a distraction. She knelt down right beside the pen and pointed to the speckled one. "That one's Peanut," she said with authority. And from that day on, he was. Names came quick after that. The smallest pup, all black with one white paw, became Socks. The fluffiest one got dubbed Teddy. The last, a quiet runt with eyes like his mother's, was called Moose. I didn't name any of them. The kids did. And I let them. It was like the whole town needed something small and good to hold on to. Maple's story spread faster than the arrival of a new diner or the retirement of a longtime teacher. Folks I hadn't seen in years came by just to peek at the puppies. Some offered to adopt. I said not yet. They were too young still. And truthfully, I wasn't ready to part with any of them. Dr. Barnes came back for a follow-up and gave Maple her shots, checked the pups again. She smiled as she weighed Teddy, who was getting chubbier by the day. "Whatever you're feeding them," she said, "keep it up. They're thriving." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I'd been using store credit to buy the better stuff from the pet aisle. It wasn't much, but it added up. I didn't care. I just wanted them healthy. The real surprise came 2 weeks later, when Maple followed me into the front of the store. It was early. Store wasn't even open yet. I was adjusting a display of garden tools when I heard the tap of her paws behind me. I turned, expecting her to have stopped just past the back room. But there she was, halfway down the center aisle. She sniffed at a box of mulch, then padded over to the floor mat near the front door and lay down. Just like that. Like she'd decided this was hers now, too. "You sure you want to be out here where people can see you?" I asked. She rested her chin on her paws and blinked. I took that as a yes. From then on, Maple became a quiet fixture at the store. Not every hour, not every day, but often enough that customers started asking for her. Some brought her treats, others just wanted to say hi. A few days a week, I'd come downstairs to find her already waiting at the door to the shop, tail giving the tiniest wag, like she was letting me know she was ready for work. The pups kept growing. Their eyes turned bright, their steps steadier. Soon they were chasing each other around the back room in clumsy loops, knocking over buckets and chewing on the ends of rope samples I'd foolishly left out. Peanut was the boldest. Moose was the quietest. Socks had a bark that sounded like a squeaky toy, and Teddy had discovered how to climb halfway up the stairs. I started bringing them outside in a little pen on warmer days. The grass behind the store wasn't much, but it was enough. Maple always followed, watching them from the shade, ears alert. She didn't bark either. She didn't need to. One afternoon, a woman named Nancy came in looking for gardening gloves. She left with a bag of gloves, a spool of twine, and a puppy in her arms. "I know I'm early," she said, cradling socks like a baby. "But I lost my husband last spring. The house is quiet. I think I need a little noise again." I hesitated, then nodded. "Just bring him back every now and then," I said, "so his brothers don't forget him." "Deal," she smiled. That night, Maple paced. She checked the blankets, whined once, then curled around the remaining pups. It was the first time she made a sound other than a low growl or sniff. She missed him. I could see it. "He's got a good home," I said gently. "But if it's too soon, I won't let any more go. Not yet." She looked at me, then turned away. Over the next week, I noticed something else. Maple's limp was getting better. Subtle, but real. Her steps grew smoother. She even did a full circle around the yard one morning before settling under the tree. Dr. Barnes had been right. Good food and rest made a difference. She was finally healing. It was during one of those slow afternoons, as I was restocking paint cans, that a man came in and froze at the sight of Maple by the counter. "That your dog?" he asked. "Sort of," I said. "Why?" He pulled out his phone and opened a photo. "I think that's my dog. Her name's not Maple. It's Ruby." My stomach dropped. The photo showed a dog that looked just like her. Same nicked ear, same golden brown eyes. But in the picture, she had a red collar and was curled up on a porch next to a teenage boy. "She went missing after the fire," the man said. "Last December, our barn caught. She ran off into the woods. We put up signs for weeks, never saw her again." I stared at the photo, then at Maple. Ruby, curled up behind the counter. "Where's the boy?" I asked quietly. He paused. "That was my son. He died in the fire." The air seemed to thin. "She was his," he added. "She slept at the foot of his bed every night." Maple stood up then, walked over, sniffed the man's boots, then sat. The man dropped to his knees. "Ruby," he said, voice breaking. "Oh, girl, I thought you were gone." She didn't bark, but she stepped closer, rested her head on his chest. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to that? The man stayed for almost an hour, told me stories about his boy, about Ruby, how she used to chase squirrels and bury tennis balls, how she'd sleep through storms as long as his son was beside her. "She's been through a lot," I finally said. "Had puppies, took care of them like a champ." He looked at her, then at me. "And she trusted you," he said. "That means something." I nodded slowly. "If you want her back," I began. "I don't know," he interrupted, voice shaking. "She found you for a reason, and the pups, maybe she needed this. Maybe I needed this too." He asked if he could visit sometimes. I said yes. And when he left, Maple sat by the door for a long time, like she was thinking. The next morning, she was curled up in her usual spot. Peanut climbed over her head. Moose was nestled by her side. I brought in 2 plates of scrambled eggs that day. I still didn't know what to call her, but she answered to both names now. And for the first time in years, my store didn't feel quiet at all. I never expected a dog to make my hardware store busier than a spring sale on lawnmowers, but there we were. 3 weeks after Maple had started lounging behind the counter like she owned the place, business was booming. People came in just to say hello to her and the puppies. I didn't mind. I'd even cleared a little area near the front where the pups could play safely behind a mesh gate I borrowed from the local daycare. It kept them contained and close enough for folks to coo over, but far enough to not get trampled by anyone looking for light bulbs. Kids pressed their noses to the mesh. Elderly folks brought dog biscuits in their pockets. One woman crocheted tiny blankets for the pups and left them in a basket at the door. Peanut, of course, immediately tried to shred his. Moose just fell asleep on his. Maple. Well, Maple watched it all with a calm, quiet sort of wisdom. She rarely barked. She didn't jump or beg. But she moved from person to person with an alertness I was starting to recognize as her form of checking in. Not guarding. More like she was reading people, seeing who they were before deciding what part of herself to give. I got used to it. The rhythm of the store changed. I wasn't just selling hardware anymore. I was hosting something. A little sanctuary in the middle of a world that felt too loud and fast most days. One chilly afternoon, just as the leaves started turning, a man in a pressed blue suit walked through the door. Not the usual type for Whitaker hardware. He didn't look at the screwdrivers, didn't glance at the extension cords. He went straight to the counter, looked over the mesh gate, and frowned. "That's her," he said. I straightened. "You know Maple?" He blinked. "Maple? No, that's Jolene. She was in the shelter 6 months ago. My wife volunteered there. We tried to foster her, but she ran off." I looked down at Maple. Jolene? Ruby? Who had raised her head and was staring back at him. Not moving. Not wagging. "You're sure?" "There's a chip in her," he said. "We never got it removed. I'd recognize her anywhere." I nodded, slowly. "She's been here a while. Had pups in an alley. Been through some stuff. Well, I'm here to take her back. We've got a yard now. Safer. My wife will be thrilled." Maple stood then, but not to go to him. She walked over to the pups, all clustered by the gate, and nosed Moose gently. Then she looked back at me. The man didn't notice. He was already pulling out his phone. Want me to show you her photo from the shelter site? They named her Jolene, but we called her Jojo. Maple flinched at that. Barely. But I saw it. Look, mister, I said. I'm sure you mean well, but this dog's not the same one you tried to foster 6 months ago. She's got her own pack now, her own rhythm. She made her choice. He narrowed his eyes. You saying you won't let me take her? I held his stare. I'm saying if she walks out with you on her own, no leash, no trickery, then fine. But if she stays, she stays. He hesitated, then crouched down and patted his knee. Jojo, come here, girl. Maple didn't move, didn't blink. She sat beside the pups, tail tucked gently around them. Guess that's your answer, I said. He stood slowly, slid his phone back in his pocket. You'll regret it. She's not yours. Maybe not, I replied. But she's not yours either. He left. The bell above the door jingled behind him. Maple turned her head slightly and licked Moose's forehead. That was the end of that. We settled into autumn like it was always meant to be this way. The pups began to teethe, which meant everything became a chew toy, including a pair of work gloves I foolishly left within reach. I had to start reinforcing the pen after Teddy figured out how to stack the blankets to boost himself over. That pup was going places. I found myself talking more, not just to Maple, but to customers, to the pups, to the walls sometimes. I think having a store full of life made me feel less like I was drifting through days that all looked the same. Then came Halloween. I hadn't decorated in years, didn't see the point. But this time, I dug out the old plastic pumpkins and fake cobwebs from the storage bin upstairs. I even carved a big jack-o'-lantern and set it by the door. Maple sniffed it and sneezed. I put a little cape on Peanut. He kept tripping over it, but didn't seem to mind. Hallie came in with her grandpa again, dressed as a pirate. She brought a tiny witch hat for Moose. He sat still while she put it on, then promptly fell asleep. That night I sat by the heater with Maple while the wind whistled outside, and the pups snored in a warm pile. You ever think about how none of this was supposed to happen? I asked. I mean, you were just a stray. I was just a guy selling nails, and now look at us. She didn't answer, of course, but she rested her head on my knee. Just for a second, then went back to the pups. The next day I got a letter in the mail, certified, from the town council. They were reviewing my business license. Complaints had been made, they said, about animals in a non-animal retail space, health concerns, safety violations. There would be an inspection. Soon. I felt my chest tighten. Not with fear, with something more like dread. Maple looked up at me from her usual spot. The pups were playing tug-of-war with an old sock. We might have a problem, I said quietly. The inspection was scheduled for Friday. I had 3 days. I cleaned the store from top to bottom. Swept. Disinfected. Organized the shelves like it was opening day. I moved the pups into a crate behind the counter during business hours. Didn't hide them, but kept them tidy, safe. Maple stayed close. Her eyes followed me from aisle to aisle. She knew something was off. On Friday morning, a white truck with a town seal pulled up. A man and a woman in matching gray jackets stepped out, clipboards in hand. Mr. Whitaker? I nodded. Right this way. They walked through the store slowly, checked the exits, measured aisle widths, peeked at the restrooms. The man scribbled notes. The woman lifted a brow when she saw the puppies. These are the dogs? Maple and her litter, I said. They've been living here temporarily. They're healthy, vaccinated. I've got the paperwork from Dr. Barnes. She knelt. Moose waddled over and licked her boot. She smiled, but quickly straightened. "Technically," she said, "you're in violation of zoning ordinances. Animals aren't permitted in hardware retail spaces unless expressly approved." "What happens next?" I asked. "We'll file a recommendation with the board. They'll vote. Could be a warning, could be a fine, could be license suspension." My stomach dropped. "Can I appeal?" "You can speak at the board meeting," the man said. "Next Thursday, 9 a.m. They left without saying much else. I sat on the floor behind the counter for a long time after that. Maple curled beside me. She didn't move, didn't sleep, just stayed close. The town buzzed with the news. Word always got around fast. Some folks came in just to offer support. Others dropped off letters they promised to read at the board meeting. Nancy came back with socks and a warm pie. "You fight this, Grant," she said. "That dog changed something in this town. Don't let them take her away." I didn't sleep much the night before the meeting. Thursday came. I put on the nicest shirt I owned, combed my hair, and left the pups with a neighbor. Maple stayed by the window as I walked out. The boardroom was packed. More people than I'd seen in one place since the high school football finals 3 years ago. I was called up to speak. I cleared my throat. "My name is Grant Whitaker. I run the hardware store on Main. I'm here today because I took in a dog who needed shelter. She had puppies. I gave them a safe place. And somehow that turned into a reason to question the license I've held for 20 years. There was a murmur in the crowd. "I know rules exist for a reason," I continued. "But I also know that this dog, Maple, has done more good for this town in 3 months than most of us do in a year. She's made people stop and talk. She's brought kids out of their shells. She's helped folks feel something again, including me." I took a breath. "I'm not asking for special treatment. I'm asking for a little grace." There was silence. Then someone stood up. Hallie's grandpa. "I come in every week," he said. "My granddaughter loves those pups. That dog's done more to lift her spirits than anything else. You take her out of that store, you're ripping out something good." One by one, people stood. Nancy, the daycare worker, even the guy who runs the diner. They spoke, short, heartfelt stories, every single one about Maple. The board recessed. 10 minutes later, they returned. A vote was held. Unanimous. I could keep my license, but they asked me to submit a formal application to designate a portion of the store as a community animal foster space. They even offered to help with paperwork. When I got home that evening, Maple was waiting at the door. She wagged her tail, just once, but it was the biggest wag yet. I crouched, rubbed her head gently. "We're not going anywhere," I said. She leaned into my hand, eyes soft. The store was ours now, and we weren't done yet. By the time December rolled in and the rooftops started catching frost, it was clear Maple had become more than just a part of the store. She was a part of the town. After the board's decision, the local paper ran a piece titled, "The Dog Who Defended the Hardware Store," complete with a picture of Maple lying proudly on the floor, with all 4 of her pups clustered around her like loyal customers. The photo was so charming the mayor had it printed and framed in his office. The town had changed in small but noticeable ways. People stayed longer in the shop now. They didn't just grab screws and go. They lingered, talked, helped. A woman named Marcy started organizing weekend reading hours for kids using a little bench I'd set up in the corner near the pen. Local teens offered to walk the pups on slow afternoons. Strangers came in from nearby counties just to meet the famous stray. It never stopped surprising me how one dog, who once refused a warm blanket, had cracked open something in people. The pups were nearly 4 months old by then, and it was getting harder to keep them all in one place. Peanut had learned how to open the mesh gate using his teeth and a very specific tilt of his head. Moose, ever the quiet observer, had developed a habit of disappearing into tight corners and emerging with random tools. One morning, I found him asleep with a measuring tape wrapped around his back like a sash. Teddy had discovered he liked climbing, and he was good at it. He could scale the stacked bags of mulch faster than any squirrel I'd seen. The only one who seemed content to stay close to Maple was Little Bear, the name I'd finally settled on for the fluffiest pup who used to be called Teddy, until folks realized how much he resembled, well, a bear cub. Adoption requests kept rolling in. I started setting up short visits with families, letting them meet the pups and see how they interacted. It was hard. Every time someone looked at Moose with those "we want to take him home" eyes, my chest pulled a little. But I knew it had to happen eventually. Dr. Barnes offered to help with the process. She even came up with a mini screening form. Nothing formal, just some basic questions to make sure folks weren't impulse adopting. The first to leave was Peanut. A young couple who'd just moved from the city came in for a hammer and left with him tucked into a flannel-lined crate in the back of their truck. They promised to send pictures. They did. One showed Peanut with a stick twice his size, grinning like he'd just conquered a kingdom. Maple watched the truck pull away, then turned and walked quietly back into the shop. She didn't whine, but she did sleep closer to the gate that night. Moose went next. A retired teacher named Greg came in for a screwdriver and sat on the floor with Moose for nearly an hour. Said he'd lost his old hound a year ago and wasn't ready until now. Moose curled up in his lap like they'd known each other forever. That was that. Socks went a week later to a family with twin boys. The boys gave him a toy bone the size of his head, and he ran in dizzying circles trying to carry it. It took 20 minutes to convince him to leave the store. He only did after Maple walked him to the door herself. Bear stayed the longest. He was quiet, attached to his mother, and didn't seem in a hurry to leave. I was secretly grateful. The store felt emptier every time a pup left, and I wasn't sure Maple was ready to be alone. Then came Christmas. The town went all out, twinkling lights wrapped around telephone poles, wreaths on every door, the high school choir caroling in front of the bank. I even put up a small tree in the shop. Marcy decorated it with the kids using handmade ornaments. One of them, shaped like a bone with glitter, hung right in the middle. Maple didn't seem to care much for the tree, but she loved the extra foot traffic, the treats, the laughter. On Christmas Eve, I closed the shop early, brought out 2 plates of roast chicken, one for me, one for her. Bear nestled into a new bed I'd set up near the space heater, fast asleep with a ribbon stuck to his tail. "We did all right, huh?" I asked Maple. She didn't respond, just scooted closer to the plate. Later that night, after I cleaned up, I sat by the window with a cup of cider. Maple joined me, her head resting lightly on my foot. The snow had started falling just as the bells from the church rang out across the square. The whole world felt hushed, soft. In that moment, I didn't miss anything. Not the past, not what had been lost, just felt the weight of something new, something whole. New Year's brought changes. Greg came by with Moose, now noticeably larger, and dropped off a thank you card and a framed photo of them hiking together. The couple who adopted Peanut sent a video of him barking at a snowman. The boys with socks brought him back for a visit, and he ran through the store like he'd never left. Bear stayed. Longer than I expected. I had offers, good ones, but none of them felt right. Bear never showed much interest in leaving, And Maple didn't push him away like she had with the others when it was time. "You want him to stay?" I asked her one night. She didn't look up, just let out a slow exhale and leaned against him. That was my answer. Dr. Barnes came by for a checkup and noticed something. Maple's coat was glossier, her eyes brighter, and her limp barely noticeable anymore. "You gave her a reason to recover," she said. "She gave herself one," I replied. Business kept steady. The designated foster corner of the shop became a permanent fixture. We started rotating in rescues from the shelter. Short stays, just enough to get them seen and maybe adopted. Maple stayed close, not a foster herself anymore, but more like a guide. The older mentor, Bear, took after her. He watched everything, learned fast, followed commands before I even finished saying them. Customers asked what breed he was. I always shrugged. Didn't matter to me. One day, Hallie came in with her grandpa, now walking with a cane. She brought a painting she made of Maple and Bear sitting under a tree, the hardware store in the background. She gave it to me without a word, just smiled. I hung it behind the counter. Then came the storm. Late February, ice and sleet. Power lines down, roads closed. We lost power for 2 days. But the store stayed warm thanks to an old propane heater I kept for emergencies. Maple and Bear curled up close while I handed out supplies to neighbors who couldn't get out. Blankets, batteries, lanterns. We made it through. When the lights came back, I found a thank you card on the steps. No name, just a note. "You kept us warm when no one else could. Thank you for the light." Maple sat beside it for a long time, like she knew what it meant. Spring crept in slowly. The frost melted. Buds appeared on the trees. Bear started spending more time outside. Running, exploring, always returning. Maple watched him one afternoon, sitting beside me on the bench behind the store. "He's growing up fast," I said. She blinked slowly. "You ready to retire from mom duty yet?" She didn't answer, but she leaned her head against my side and closed her eyes. I watched Bear chase a butterfly across the grass. We still had work to do. And plenty more to come. The spring of that year came in waves. First the wet thaw, then the tentative sun, and finally the full bloom of green, almost overnight. The sidewalk in front of the store was dusted with petals from the old cherry tree by the diner. And every morning, I found paw prints through them. Maple's, mostly. Bear's, too, now bigger and bolder. I'd opened up the front window for the first time since October, letting in the cool morning breeze. Maple lay in her usual spot, just beneath the sill, her chin resting on the floor, eyes half closed. Bear was curled up nearby, snoring softly. He'd started to look more like a proper dog, and less like a round fluff ball. He had Maple's calm eyes and her quiet way of observing everything before acting. Customers still came for the hardware, but more and more, they came for the warmth of the place. Something about the presence of those two dogs had softened the corners of everything. There was a comfort in their presence, a reminder that even the smallest acts, offering a bowl of food, cracking open a door, could ripple outward. One morning, I found a note pinned to the bulletin board near the register. "Dear Grant, I walked past your store the day the brown dog showed up. I remember thinking she looked tired but proud. I didn't stop. I didn't do anything. I've thought about her ever since. I guess I want to say thank you for doing what I didn't." There was no signature. I left the note where it was. Figured it belonged there, part of the store's growing mosaic of quiet kindnesses. In April, Bear made his first real escape. Not out of defiance, more like curiosity with a side of poor judgment. I'd propped the side door open while unloading a pallet of potting soil, and in the span of 30 seconds, he slipped past me and was off like a flash. Maple barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, and I dropped the pallet right where it was. She took off down the alley after him, faster than I'd seen her move in months. I grabbed the leash and a handful of liver treats and followed. We found Bear near the riverbank behind the post office, barking furiously at a turtle the size of a dinner plate. Maple got there first. She didn't growl or bark, just nudged Bear away gently, then stood between him and the water. Bear settled almost instantly, tail down, head tilted like he knew he'd messed up. I clipped the leash onto his collar and looked at Maple. I should have kept a better eye on him. She didn't respond, just followed us home. After that, Bear stuck closer, like he'd had his first taste of the world's bigness and decided, for now, he preferred the safe, warm circle we'd made. Around mid-May, a local teacher named Sarah approached me about starting a small Saturday program for kids interested in animals. Nothing fancy, just story time, maybe a chance to meet the dogs, learn about care and responsibility. I said yes without thinking twice. The first session had 6 kids, the second 15. By the third, I was scrambling to find enough stools and chairs. Bear sat through it all like a seasoned pro. Maple, too. They let the kids brush them, feed them, even dress them in silly little hats one of the moms brought in. I couldn't believe how patient they were. I'd never seen dogs sit that still through a reading of the pokey little puppy. One of the boys, 7 or 8 with freckles across his nose, came up after class and whispered, "I don't have a dog, but I pretend Bear is mine when I'm here." "He can be yours on Saturdays," I said. The kid grinned and ran off. One Saturday, Sarah brought in a guest speaker, an animal behaviorist from a nearby university. She spent some time watching Maple and Bear before coming up to me. "Did you train them yourself?" she asked. "Not really. They kind of trained me." She smiled. "They're remarkable, especially Maple. There's a steadiness in her, like she understands people better than most people do." I nodded. I'd seen it too. That week I started noticing a shift in Maple. Not a decline, just a slowing down. She slept more during the day, took shorter walks, ate a little less. Dr. Barnes came by to check her out and ran some basic tests. "She's healthy," she said after the visit. "Just older. The past year probably aged her more than we know." I sat with that for a long time. I wasn't ready to think of Maple as old. She'd been the fire starter for everything. My quiet companion, the heartbeat of the shop. But I didn't argue. I just started making things easier for her. Softer bedding, ramps where steps had once been, more space by the heater. Bear noticed, too. He began sleeping closer to her, fetching things before I could. He started picking up her habits, tilting his head before choosing where to lay down, waiting until the store closed before barking at the mop bucket he'd always hated. He was learning how to be something bigger than himself. One rainy Tuesday, a man stopped by the store while on a road trip, said he'd heard about the dog store on a message board online. He stayed an hour, bought a toolbox, asked if he could take a picture with Maple. She agreed, with a blink and a small tail wag. After he left, I checked the site he'd mentioned. Someone had written a post about us. It was titled, "The Hardware Store That Heals." It was full of comments, people from other towns, photos of the pups in their new homes, little stories about Maple, about how seeing her story made them believe in good again. I didn't respond, just read every word. Bear fell asleep that night with his head across Maple's back. She didn't move. In June, the town held its annual spring fair. I set up a booth with tools and gardening kits, and Sarah set up a tent next to mine with a sign that read, "Meet Maple and Bear." It was the busiest booth of the day. Kids lined up to feed Bear treats. Adults asked questions about fostering. A local rescue organization offered to partner with us, using the shop as a satellite location for adoption weekends. I said yes. Of course. Maple lay on a small cot under the shade, greeting people with quiet dignity. Someone painted a watercolor of her on the spot and gave it to me. I hung it next to the cash register. Later that week, a little girl came in with her parents. She walked straight to Maple, knelt, and whispered something I couldn't hear. Then she hugged her gently. "She helped me," the girl said to me, standing up. "With what?" "I don't cry as much anymore." That night, I closed the shop with the kind of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't just that we'd built something. It was that Maple had allowed herself to be part of it. Had chosen us again and again. Her pups, the town, me. And now Bear was learning to carry that forward. He wasn't just her son anymore. He was becoming her legacy. And even though I knew things would keep changing, I wasn't afraid of that anymore, because now we were rooted. And roots, I'd learned, could grow in the most unexpected places, even between crates of nails and shelves of WD-40. The story wasn't over. It was still unfolding, one quiet paw print at a time. The summer heat settled over Wayland Springs like a slow, heavy breath, stretching each day until it glowed with golden dust and the low hum of cicadas. I swapped the space heater out for fans and made sure fresh water was always nearby. Maple preferred the cool concrete of the back room during the warmest hours, though she still made her daily walk to the front of the store around mid-morning, like she was checking inventory with me. Bear, on the other hand, had turned into a parade. He'd grown lean and strong, his paws finally proportionate to his body. He greeted customers with a soft bark, sometimes carrying a rope toy in his mouth, which he would drop on their feet as if inviting them into his world of fetch. One time he offered a wrench. Thankfully, it was clean. Every Saturday morning, we hosted animal visits with the help of the rescue group, and Bear naturally took on the role of the welcoming committee. He walked among the visiting dogs with an air of easy confidence. If a pup got nervous, he'd lie down beside them, showing them it was okay. Maple didn't participate much. She watched from a distance, but her presence still grounded the place. Even the jumpiest dogs calmed when she was near. We had our regulars now, folks who stopped in weekly just to see the dogs. Some brought treats, others brought coffee, and sat near the back with their cups, chatting with me or simply sitting in quiet company. A man named Tom, who'd lost his wife that spring, came in almost every afternoon and read the paper in the same corner chair. Bear always sat next to him, chin on Tom's knee. "He knows," Tom would say. "He knows I miss her." One July morning, we had our biggest turnout yet. A litter of shepherd mixes had just arrived from a shelter in the next county over. There were 6 of them, curious, clumsy, loud, and the shop practically buzzed with energy. Maple watched them from her spot, occasionally flicking her ears when their yipping got too excited. Bear was in the middle of them all, letting them crawl on him, bark in his face, chew his tail. He took it all in stride. A teenage boy with braces and a quiet voice picked out one of the shepherd pups and named him Comet. The pup licked his face, and that was that. Maple didn't move from her spot until the last puppy left. Then she stood, stretched, and walked the length of the store slowly before lying down next to Bear. That was when I noticed it. She was slowing down more than usual. Her walks were shorter, her naps deeper. She still had that spark in her eyes, still rose to greet familiar faces, but there was a weight to her movement I hadn't seen before. Dr. Barnes stopped by for her regular check and gave me a small nod after examining her. "She's aging gently," she said. "Keep doing what you're doing. Let her lead." So I did. I let her set the pace. If she wanted to sit by the door all day, I didn't move her. If she wandered the aisles in the evening before close, I let her take her time. Customers noticed, too. They spoke softer around her. Kids pet her more gently. Even Bear followed her with new awareness, like he was adjusting to her rhythm. In late July, we hosted a community picnic behind the store. Marcy brought the reading bench out. Tom grilled hot dogs. Kids ran through a sprinkler I rigged up with PVC pipes. Bear was in heaven, chasing water, rolling in the grass, being fed bites of everything. Maple spent most of the picnic under the oak tree near the back fence. I laid out a blanket and a bowl of ice water. She dozed while the world spun around her. As the sun dipped low, casting the sky in streaks of pink and orange, a little girl sat beside her. Didn't say anything, just stroked her fur gently. Maple didn't open her eyes, but her tail thumped once against the grass. That night, I sat with her long after everyone left. The yard was quiet, scattered with paper plates and forgotten juice boxes. Bear curled up nearby, exhausted. Maple lay beside me, her breathing steady. "You've done good, girl," I said. "You really have." She blinked once and closed her eyes. August rolled in, thick with humidity. The cherry tree dropped its last blooms, and the days took on a sleepy quality. Even the hardware side of things slowed down. Folks were on vacation or hiding from the heat. I didn't mind. Bear began picking up little tasks, fetching light boxes, sitting politely beside new dogs during foster sessions. He had this sense of when things were tense, like if a new pup was scared or a customer looked like they were carrying more than just shopping bags. He'd sidle up, sit quietly, and wait. Just like Maple used to. Sarah dropped by with a stack of drawings from the kids. All of them were of Maple and Bear, some crude crayon scribbles, others surprisingly detailed. One showed Maple with a cape. Another had Bear in a cowboy hat. I put them on a corkboard by the register. "They see heroes in them," she said. "So do I replied. The last week of August, Bear did something he'd never done before. He sat in the very spot Maple always claimed under the window. It was early. Quiet. He sat, looked out at the road, and didn't move for a long while. Maple didn't mind. She just lay near the counter instead, tail gently flicking. Change was happening. I could feel it. Not in a sudden, crashing way, more like the slow bend of branches in a breeze. Nothing breaking, just shifting. One night, I found an envelope slipped through the front door. Inside was a photo of Maple, taken during the fair, with Bear by her side and a line of kids in the background. There was no name, just a sticky note with 6 words. "Thank you for choosing to follow." I didn't know what it meant exactly, but I tacked it to the board anyway. The next day, Bear barked 3 times in the morning, an unusual burst of sound. I came out from the back to find him circling a large box that had been left by the door. Inside were supplies, food, toys, blankets. No note, just generosity, showing up like it always had. Later that week, An older couple came in with their grandson. The boy had autism, they explained. He didn't talk much. But as soon as he saw Bear, his whole face lit up. He sat with him for almost an hour, stroking his back, said 2 words before leaving. "Soft dog." They cried. I cried after they left. Maple had been quiet that day, watching. Bear walked her to the back afterward and stayed beside her the rest of the afternoon. It hit me again. He was ready. Not to leave, but to carry it forward. I didn't know where the road ahead led, but for now it was enough to know we were walking it together. And the paws that once refused shelter now led us every step of the way. September came with that first real bite in the morning air, the kind that reminded you to carry a jacket even if the afternoon promised sun. I'd always liked September in Wayland Springs. It was quiet, reflective, the kind of month where time didn't feel so loud. Maple had started sleeping more in the back corner of the store, under the rack of gardening gloves. I left a soft cushion there, flanked by 2 of her favorite blankets. Sometimes Bear joined her, resting his chin gently over her paw, like he was trying to memorize the feel of it. We didn't talk about it. Maple's slowing down, but everyone who stopped by noticed in some way. They spoke a little softer, walked a little slower. No one rushed her. They knew, even if no one put words to it, that they were witnessing the quiet grace of a chapter winding deeper into the story. One Tuesday afternoon, a boy named Caleb came in with his mom. He was 9, wore a baseball cap too big for his head, and carried a shoebox with holes punched in the top. "I found a bird," he said, holding it out like a sacred treasure. "It hit our window. I didn't know where else to go." Maple stirred from her corner when she heard his voice. Bear walked over first, curious. I opened the box gently to find a tiny sparrow, stunned but alive, blinking up at me. "Let's set it in the back, quiet-like," I said. Caleb followed. We found an empty cardboard tray and lined it with a cloth. Maple padded up slowly and sat nearby. She didn't bark, didn't sniff too close, just sat there, her eyes locked on the tiny bird like she understood the weight of Caleb's worry. "She's watching over it," he whispered. The bird fluttered a bit, but stayed put. Maple stayed, too. Caleb came back every day that week, checking in, sitting cross-legged beside her and the box. On Friday morning, the bird hopped to the edge, spread its wings, and took off into the blue. Caleb didn't say anything, but he wrapped his arms around Maple's neck and buried his face there for a long time. When he left, Maple licked his cheek. Once. Bear barked at a squirrel on the sidewalk later that afternoon and somehow managed to knock over a rack of seed packets in the process. I pretended to be mad, but it was hard when he sat so proud in the middle of the mess, tail sweeping the floor like he'd done something heroic. "Some watchdog you are," I said, picking up scattered packets of corn and carrots. He barked once in reply, the kind of bark that felt like a laugh. By the end of the month, the first leaves had begun to turn. The old cherry tree out front lost its top layer in a windstorm, and I spent a Saturday morning sweeping petals off the walk. Maple watched from the doorway, her nose twitching in the breeze. Bear lay beside her, a rope toy between his paws, eyes drifting shut. Dr. Barnes came by unannounced one Thursday with 2 cups of tea and a small box of joint supplements. "Not necessary," I said. "Not required," she replied. "Just helpful." Maple took them without fuss. I could see the difference in a few days. She still moved slowly, but with less stiffness. Bear seemed to notice too. He didn't hover as much. Let her have a little more space, a little more pride. One afternoon, Sarah brought a group of kids by for a new round of drawings. They wanted to decorate for fall. We spent the better part of an hour pinning up crayon pumpkins, acorn creatures, and dogs in Halloween costumes. One kid drew Maple as a wizard. Another gave Bear vampire teeth. "He's too nice to be a vampire," one of them declared. "He's a kindness monster." The name stuck. For the rest of the week, everyone called Bear the kindness monster. That Sunday, Tom stopped in with a thermos of soup and a photograph in a frame. It was of his wife holding their old golden retriever, both of them laughing. He placed it on the shelf near Maple's corner. "She would have loved this place," he said. "And she would have loved Maple." Maple licked his hand and laid her head in his lap while he sipped soup and looked out at the soft afternoon. We were no longer just a hardware store. We were something else entirely. A bridge, maybe. A sanctuary between the noise of life and the quiet things that still mattered. We sold screws and hoses and mulch, yes, but we also kept space for slow moments, shared silences, and second chances. I got a letter in the mail the following week. Handwritten, no return address. "I passed through town last fall. Your dog stood in the doorway and watched me until I turned around and came inside. I didn't need anything, but I left with something I'd been missing for years. Peace. I hope you know what she is." I read it twice. Then again. Maple was lying nearby, her ears twitching as Bear gently chewed the corner of a dog-safe pumpkin toy. "Yeah," I said softly. "I know." In the evenings now, Bear would sit in front of the window while Maple rested in her corner. Sometimes they switched. Sometimes they both stayed there, side by side, like sentries of a quiet kingdom. I started journaling again. Nothing big, just short lines. Things I didn't want to forget. Maple's tail twitching when the church bells rang. Bear nosing open the gate for a shy foster pup. A customer crying softly while hugging Maple's neck after a hard day. Little things. Big things. The town started calling the back area the den. A woman painted a little sign and brought it in. I hung it right over the play space for the rotating foster dogs. Fall crept closer. The light turned amber. Mornings were crisp, and the smell of wood smoke drifted in from the hills. Maple stood by the door one morning longer than usual, staring down the street like she was waiting for someone. I stood beside her. "What do you see, girl?" She didn't answer, just blinked slowly and leaned into my leg for a moment. Bear barked behind us, playful and light. The kind of bark that said, "Come chase me, the leaves are falling." So we did. And the day moved forward, the way they all had, quietly, fully, with the knowledge that nothing lasts forever. But some things, if you're lucky, stay long enough to change everything. The leaves came down all at once that October. One weekend, they were still rustling high above the streets of Wayland Springs, and by Monday, the sidewalks were thick with yellow and red and orange, like someone had shaken out the sky. It was Bear's favorite time. He'd leap into piles taller than himself, sending leaves flying in every direction, then skitter out like he'd been ambushed. The kids loved it. Even the adults who passed by couldn't help but stop and smile. Maple watched it all from her corner spot under the front window. Her muzzle had gone a little more silver, and her eyes, those amber wells of calm, held a quiet light that said she was still taking everything in, even if she didn't move around as much. I noticed that when Bear got too wild, he'd loop around and nudge her gently, like he was saying, "Did you see that?" She'd blink at him slowly, maybe flick her tail. And that was enough. The town was planning its annual fall festival, and this year the committee asked if I'd host a pet photo booth. They said it was because of the dogs, but I had a feeling they just wanted an excuse to see Maple and Bear dressed up. Sarah brought over a box of costumes. Nothing too elaborate. A pumpkin hat. A little bow tie. Bear wore his with no resistance, happy to be the center of attention. Maple tolerated hers for a full 10 minutes before pawing it off and curling back into her blanket. The crowd cheered anyway. That weekend, the shop was packed. People flowed in and out like a steady tide. The booth in the corner captured photos of dogs in costumes, families crouched beside Bear, kids giggling as Maple calmly sat between them. One photo showed Tom holding Bear's paw. Another showed a little girl pretending to read Maple a story. Every single picture seemed to carry the same energy, joy rooted in something deeper. One afternoon, during a lull between photos, a woman approached the counter with her arms crossed and a hesitant smile. She introduced herself as Marlene. Said she was visiting from out of state, passing through. But she paused when she saw Maple. "That dog," she said. "She reminds me of my old shepherd mix, Daisy. Lost her 2 winters ago. Haven't been able to even think about getting another." She crouched near Maple, who stirred just enough to press her head lightly into Marlene's palm. "I don't know what it is," Marlene whispered, "but something about her." She trailed off, and I didn't push. Some stories don't need to be said out loud. Maple lay there quietly for the rest of the afternoon. Marlene came back 3 days in a row. On the 3rd, she brought a new leash and a bag of treats. Not for Maple. For a foster pup named Cricket. A lanky hound mix with ears too big for his head and a nervous tail that only wagged when Bear walked by. "I'd like to take him home," she said. "If it's all right." "It's more than all right," I told her. Bear walked Cricket to the door that afternoon. Maple watched from her blanket. Her ears twitched as the car door shut. Then she sighed, long and soft, and closed her eyes. The next few weeks blurred in that warm golden light October always brought. The kids drew Halloween decorations and taped them to the walls. Sarah's reading sessions turned into storytelling circles. Marcy brought cinnamon donuts every Saturday. The hardware sales didn't spike, but I didn't care. We were full. Maple's steps grew slower. Sometimes she didn't make it to the front of the store until mid-morning. Bear adjusted to it, waiting until she moved before doing his rounds. He never left her side for long. If a visitor got too excited, he stepped in. If another dog barked too loud, he positioned himself between them and her. Watching Bear, I saw her influence fully now. It was in his posture, his patience, his softness. She had taught him how to hold a space for others. I began keeping a journal behind the counter. Not for the shop anymore, but for them. I'd jot down what I saw. Small moments. Bear sat still while the toddler fed him bits of granola bar. Maple let her paw hang off the cushion today. She's sleeping heavier, deeper. Customer left crying after hugging Maple. Said it was the first time in months she felt okay. Tom brought in a small plant one morning, a rosemary bush. He placed it beside Maple's corner and said, "Something that lasts. She's done that for all of us." October ended with a storm, not a wild one. Just enough rain to keep folks indoors and muddy the sidewalks. Bear hated thunder. Always had. But that night, instead of running to hide, he lay down beside Maple and didn't move. His body trembled once when the thunder cracked, but Maple licked his cheek, and he settled again. When the power flickered, I lit a candle and sat on the floor with them, letting the shadows dance across the walls. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, everything felt still. The morning after the storm, we opened late. I stepped outside to sweep the walkway and found that someone had left a basket by the door. Inside were handmade collars, each one embroidered with names: Bear, Maple, Moose, Socks, Peanut, Teddy, even Ruby, stitched in smaller letters under Maple's. There was no note. Maple sniffed them one by one. Then she took the collar with her name and rested her head on it like a pillow. Bear took his and paraded it around the shop for an hour. By mid-November, the air had sharpened. Frost began edging the windows. I brought the heater back out. Maple's blanket pile grew thicker. Bear had started curling up next to her at night, even when I tried to separate their beds. He needed her close. One evening, a couple walked in with their son, maybe 6 or 7, and stood by the dog pen for a long time. Their son had just started talking again after a difficult year, they explained. Trauma, they said, quietly. Bear padded over, tail low but wagging. He sat beside the boy without prompting. The boy said nothing, but he smiled. The parents smiled too. And I watched something inside that boy shift. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. "We'll come back," the mother said. "Just to sit." And they did. They came every Thursday afternoon for 3 weeks straight, until the boy finally spoke again, this time to Bear. "Hi." One word. That was enough. Bear looked back at Maple. She was watching, eyes soft, tail barely moving. They were both still teaching us. Thanksgiving came fast. The town organized a shared meal in the park. I brought Bear and a thermos of soup. Maple stayed behind. It was too cold, too noisy. I hated leaving her, but I knew she preferred quiet now. When we came back, she was curled up in the sunbeam by the back door, sleeping deeply. Bear walked over and nuzzled her ear. She lifted her head slightly, just enough to see him. Then she closed her eyes again. I sat down beside them and whispered, "Happy Thanksgiving, girl." "Thank you." The hardware store was never just about nails and paint. It had become a space for healing, a place to remember how to care, how to hope. And every day, Maple and Bear reminded us how far love could reach, even when spoken only in silence and paw steps. We still had winter ahead, but we would face it the way we always had, together. One breath, one wag, one day at a time. The first snow came the night after the holiday lights were strung up along Main Street. I'd just finished hanging a string across the hardware shop's front window. Nothing fancy, just soft golden bulbs that glowed like candlelight, when Bear let out a single sharp bark. I turned just in time to see flakes falling against the glass. It was slow at first, gentle, like someone shaking sugar over the world. Bear pressed his nose to the window, tail swaying, eyes wide. Maple lay nearby, her body curled on her winter bed, eyes open but unmoved. She'd seen plenty of snow. But Bear, full of energy and wonder, looked like it was the first time. It wasn't, but it was the first time he was seeing it without distraction. The kind of seeing that comes when you realize something is changing around you, even if you can't name it yet. That night, I left the lights on after closing. Just the front ones. I sat on the floor beside Maple while Bear drifted from window to door and back again. The heater buzzed. The air smelled like cinnamon, someone's gift from earlier that day. Candles made in town, part of a fundraiser for the school. I hadn't had the heart to light it yet, but I could still smell the sweetness from the counter. Maple didn't sleep much that night. Not deeply. Her breathing had become lighter, slower. Bear settled beside her after a while, resting his chin gently on her paw the way he'd done every evening that week. The next morning, I woke early. Not from noise, just from the kind of silence that makes your heart sit up before your body does. I came downstairs, coffee untouched in my hand, and found Bear lying alone in front of the heater. Maple was gone. She looked peaceful, her body still warm, curled in her usual way, as if she'd simply drifted out of herself during the night. No struggle, no sound, just stillness. I didn't speak. I sat with her. Bear pressed himself against my side and let out a long, low whine that sounded like the earth itself was mourning. The shop didn't open that day. People knocked. I didn't answer. Some left flowers by the door. One child left a picture, a crayon drawing of Maple wearing a crown, her eyes bright, her tail high. Tom came by that afternoon. He didn't say a word, just stood with me and Bear beside her blanket, hands clasped in front of him. Sarah came later. She brought a card signed by over 30 kids. Dr. Barnes stopped in close to sundown. She knelt beside Maple, touched her head softly and whispered, "Thank you." I buried her in the yard behind the shop, under the oak tree where she'd spent so many afternoons. The town helped. Someone brought wooden stakes. Someone else built a simple fence. One of the teenagers carved her name into a wooden sign, Maple. Below it, in smaller letters, she chose us. The next day, Bear sat beside that spot for hours. He didn't whine, didn't pace, just stayed. Customers came quietly that week. They spoke in softer voices. They brought treats for Bear, though he didn't eat much. I left his bowl full every night and changed it in the morning. Slowly, over days, his appetite returned. I began lighting the cinnamon candle each evening after close. It smelled like warmth, like memory. Bear began to change, not all at once, but I saw it. He watched the door the way Maple used to, sat near nervous pups who came in for their first foster visit, nudged hesitant children into comfort. He didn't replace her. He never could. But he filled the space she left by standing in it with quiet strength. One morning, I found him lying in Maple's old spot under the window. He looked out over Main Street with the same steady gaze she once had. It wasn't imitation. It was remembering. Carrying forward. The hardware store kept going. So did we. Winter deepened. Snow covered the ground for weeks at a time. Bear discovered his love for snowballs, chasing them down like a retriever, sometimes forgetting they disappeared the moment he caught them. It didn't stop him from trying again. And again. We hosted a toy drive for the holidays. The kids insisted it be held in Maple's name. Someone painted a sign, "The Maple Tree Toy Drive." We filled 4 bins in 3 days. Bear wore a red scarf and helped greet every donor with a wag and a soft bark. The night before Christmas Eve, I lit a second candle beside the one that always burned for her. This one was pine-scented. For Bear. I looked around the shop. There were garlands across the counter, cards taped to the walls, baskets of handmade dog treats from a local baker. But it was more than decoration. It was proof. Proof that something once broken had mended here, that a stray dog who once refused warmth had opened the door for so many others to find it. Bear curled up at my feet as I wrote my last journal entry of the year. She was the beginning. He is the continuation. And I am lucky beyond measure. On Christmas morning, I woke to find Bear sitting at the foot of my bed upstairs, tail wagging slowly, eyes bright. In his mouth was a ribbon. Maple's old ribbon. The one she wore that first fair. He dropped it into my lap, then sat. I tied it around his collar. We went downstairs, opened the door, and stepped out into the soft, white world. Snowflakes clung to his fur. He looked up, then took a few steps forward. I followed. Because love, once given, doesn't end. It just finds a new way to walk beside you.